Hi, my name is Lucas Ballantyne. I'm going to be presenting on the effects of alcohol on attention. This first article we're looking at is the effects of alcohol on attention, orienting and dual task performance during simulated driving, an event-related potential study. As far as theories go, there's one that was really being looked into, and it was this. Alcohol-induced attention deficits may possibly be responsible for this deterioration of driving performance with increasing alcohol dosages. So essentially, the motivation behind this study was to look into how alcohol affects driving performance. The hypothesis being research was this. Researchers predicted that alcohol would have a dose-dependent deteriorating effect on performance, especially in dual task situations. The methods are pretty straightforward. There were 32 participants, 16 of them men, 16 of them women, all between the ages of 21 and 50. Each person had to have had a valid US driver's license and they had to drink recreationally in their daily life. It was a single blind study which used a driving simulator to test the effects of alcohol on attention over a span of 5 days within 2 test drives a day. So how this worked was each participant would come in each day at one of these 5 alcohol levels, right? So they would come in and they would drink enough alcohol to get them to one of these levels, and then they would drive in the morning, and then later they would drive under one of these active or passive auditory tasks, right? So the first drive would be a single task, the second would be a dual task. And each task was being measured for steering errors and reaction times as measures of attention. So essentially any skew in either would show a lapse in attention. This first chart right here shows both passive and active group steering errors. On the top, we see the passive group, and as alcohol consumption increases, we clearly see that steering errors do as well, especially in that dual task performance. We see that, especially towards this latter end, a big increase in steering errors. On the bottom, in the active group, we see the same thing, a pretty steady increase throughout, especially in the dual task, especially when you get up higher into that legal limit. We see a big increase in steering errors. Moving on to reaction time, we see on the top, we see passive again, on the bottom, active. Same thing as steering errors. We see that in single task, there's a clear increase from 2.23 to 2.87 when alcohol consumption is increased, as well as dual task from 2.21 to 2.98. On the bottom, the active group, we see a lot clear increase, almost a whole millisecond, in single task from 517 all the way up to 619, and in dual task from 538 to 687, so a pretty big jump in that dual task. Overall, we see that alcohol clearly affects our reaction time as well as the errors that we make while driving. The second article is titled The Effects of Alcohol and Extended Practice on Divided Attention Performance. The theories being looked into here is pretty simple. It was just the idea that under the influence of alcohol, humans can divide attention well. So essentially the motivation was to look at how humans can divide attention under the influence of alcohol in any situation. The hypothesis goes like this. It was since the alcohol is thought to reduce attentional capacity or cognitive processing resources, those under the influence of alcohol show a greater decrease in performance on tasks requiring effortful processing than on tasks requiring less effortful and more automatic processing. The methods were pretty straightforward as well. There was 24 people, all of them being men, all from the University of Manchester, with an average age of 20 and a half years old. This was a single blind study that used a joystick and a foot pedal to both track and detect items and noises on a screen through an audio recorder. The independent variables were the amount of alcohol consumed. So on days 1 and 9, they would consume alcohol, and on days 2 and 10, there wouldn't be any. And the days in between were just practice, which is the second independent variable. So as we saw more practice, we saw a different effect on attention. And then the third would be whether or not it was a single or dual task. So whether or not they'd be clearly detecting with just the foot pedal or just the joystick, or if they were using both. And this whole study was measuring how alcohol affected tracking and detection. So the whole divided attention, right? Here we have our first chart, and it has to do with the tracking error. In this first day up here, we're seeing a dramatic decrease in tracking errors, right? And that's strictly because people are actually understanding what they're doing in all the tasks and they're kind of getting a hang of it. As we get down to these later days, we see that it's a pretty balanced graph. There isn't too much like skew or differentiation. We do see that dual tasks tend to be higher in tracking errors than single tasks, but other than that, not too much here. Moving on to the detection rate, kind of a similar vibe. We see that in the single task, there's not too much going on from 1 to 2, and then from 3 to 4. Again, that first single task on day 1 is just kind of a decrease in detection because they're starting to figure out what they're doing, and then we kind of stick around this 250 millisecond time in both the first, second, third, and fourth. But when we get up to dual task, we see definite a definite increase in detection rate for sure. And then we move on to this chart over here, and it just kind of sees the absolute effect. And we can clearly see that alcohol has an effect on our attention rate, right? And so practice also has an effect in dual, but mainly in single, we just see alcohol. In dual, we do see alcohol as well. The author's ideas are pretty straightforward as well. In the first article, the authors noticed that their hypothesis was correct. There's a clear increase in attention errors in steering and in reaction time. We all are able to see a clear distinction between each level as blood alcohol content increases, especially through those graphs. In the second article, the authors are able to see a clear increase in attention errors and tracking, more so in reaction time, though, especially in that dual task. As far as the hypothesis goes, it wasn't really proven, but it was supported by some of the evidence brought to light. Overall, the study showed us that alcohol has an effect on attention in some way, shape, or form, especially in dual task. And as far as reference goes, these are both the articles. Thank you for listening.